Welcome to the Real News Network in Baltimore. I'm Kim Brown. On Wednesday, March 8th, scores of rallies are planned for two intertwined events, International Women's Day and a Day Without Women, with the latter hoping to capitalize on the momentum that was on display at the Women's March on Washington after the inauguration of Donald Trump back in January. Organizers are calling on women to wear red on March the 8th, also avoid paid and unpaid labor, and a call to not go shopping unless it's at a woman or minority-owned business. Los Angeles is expected to draw among the bigger crowds on Wednesday, and today we're joined with one of the organizers who's also a friend of the Real News because she brings the real news every day on her nationally syndicated radio show, The Sojourner Truth. Ms. Margaret Prescod is here with us. Welcome back, Margaret.
Oh, good to be with you, Kim.
So, Margaret, tell us about what we can expect on Wednesday, March 8th, because International Women's Day is already an established event, but the Day Without the Woman is sort of piggybacking on what was already planned for International Women's Day. So help us clarify this, if you could.
Yeah, let's clarify it, because actually tomorrow will be the International Women's Strike, taking place in more than 50 countries around the world. That strike was called for prior to the Women's March on Washington by women in Poland, Argentina, and other countries. The United States catching up rather late in the game. But it is an international strike. It has a very specific platform about gender violence, labor rights, ending racism, discrimination, environmental rights, and more. Now, on February 14th, the Women's March on Washington announced a day without a woman would also be on March 8th, and they've issued a statement saying the Women's March on Washington stands in solidarity with the International Women's Strike. So they are International Women's Strike activities happening really around the world, more than 50 countries, from Thailand to Haiti to Ireland to Finland to Poland, throughout Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, etc. The Day Without a Woman specifically happening in the United States. And both the Day Without a Woman and the International Women's Strike organizers, I'm one of the national coordinators of the International Women's Strike, have done our best to really try to, work together and be supportive of each other and share the call for women to wear red on that day.
You know, Margaret, I mean, the roots of this movement here in the U.S. go back over 100 years when in 1908, 15,000 women marched in the streets of New York City demanding shorter hours, higher wages, and the right to vote. And so many of these issues are still present in women's lives. So imagine where women would be if 100 years ago these women didn't start calling for these things to change and marching. So tell us how the plight of the woman, especially in the United States, but even across the globe, has changed ever since this movement initially began.
Yeah, and I should say, too, that this movement has built on previous strikes. The women in Iceland in 1975 went out on strike and literally shut the country down. And after that, the first prime minister of Iceland was elected. And then to underscore their point, they did it again in 1980. And then those of us who are part of the women's network that I'm with, we started doing something called Time Off for Women in the mid-1980s. And I'd actually forgotten about it until a reporter said, "Are you the same people that did Time Off for Women in the 1980s?" in several countries around the world, of course, inspired by the women in Iceland. And then the Global Women's Strike, which began in 2000, we have been organizing every International Women's Day since then. But this is the first time that it really is truly a global international strike with so many countries involved. Prior to that, there were countries like India and Peru, the UK, the US, some of the Caribbean countries, Ireland involved in it. But now there are over 50 countries around the world, and everywhere we are, poverty is a main issue for women. Reproductive justice, a huge issue in places like Poland, Argentina, as well as Ireland. Of course, environmental justice, because women being the main caregivers everywhere we are, we're bearing the brunt of environmental devastation, as we do when there's war and when there's occupation. And labor rights. We still don't have pay equity. Included in the statement that will be read in all 50 countries tomorrow includes a call for the recognition of the work of caregivers and resources for the work of caregivers. Of course, that includes mothers and all of the unwaged caregiving work that we do, that internationally the value of which is over $16 trillion. But nevertheless, as women, and that's just in our unwaged work, not to mention what we do in wage jobs, but yet women are still basically treated as though we're charity cases when we ask for childcare or help for elderly dependents. When we work, as though we're getting something, we're asking for something, and we're not making a contribution. I think that some of that is going to change after tomorrow, although we know that in the United States in particular, it will look like a day of women's resistance. There are going to be some traditional strikes, school districts closing, etc. But for a number of women, they're going to take whatever time they can. Some of us will take the full day. Some of us will take half a day. Cafeteria workers in some of the school districts that are not closing are planning on just wearing red in solidarity. Some women who work in call centers are going to do a 1 or 2 minute stand up, right, in solidarity. So people are finding all kinds of creative ways to participate. And we think that that's really, really a good thing. And obviously building, of course, on the movement against Trump, about his announcement of yet another version of a Muslim ban, one cleaned up. So the no ban, no wall, healthcare for all will also be a key issue, not only in Southern California, but across the United States. And you know what, Kim? At 6 p.m., everywhere we are in the world, at 6 p.m., women are going to make noise.
Well,
That's
Margaret,
going to be interesting.
you bring up a point that I wanted to have you expand upon. Is I'm curious whether or not you have seen an influx of passion, either in the form of anger or determination. You spoke about the American International Women's Day being framed as a day of resistance. I mean, as you said, Donald Trump is the president of the United States who has openly bragged about sexually assaulting women. He has publicly degraded women. He is, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Donald Trump has some misogynistic tendencies himself. So in the age of Trump, have you noticed this year a little bit more galvanization around March the 8th?
Oh, absolutely. It's much more political. And in contrast with the Women's March on Washington, women's rights are human rights, the theme, right? If you look at the International Women's Strike and you go to the website at womenstrikeus.org, you will see a very political, very laid out platform, including one that's anti-racist, anti-imperialist, standing and supporting the Palestinian people, support for caregivers and labor rights, $15 an hour, reproductive justice for all. This is a very political event. And you know what? It's not a Saturday march. It's happening in the middle of the week, right? So that means that people who come out and participate, it's a different kind of political statement. Of course, the large marches are wonderful. They're welcoming. There are a big tent. This one, much more political, a lot more involvement by low-income women of color. And Kim, it makes sense because given that the fact that this is global, women of color are the majority, right? So some pundits who may claim, well, this is a strike for the privileged, are really missing the point from their privileged perspective to really look and see who is in the leadership of the International Women's Strike, who are the participants in the International Women's Strike. In Southern California, Black Lives Matter LA will be on the platform. The Black Women's Health Project immigrant women who are facing deportation, the Day Laborers Association. I mean, these are the people that are coming together with people like Dolores Huerta, co-founder of the Farm Workers Union with Cesar Chavez, to the other end of the spectrum where Jane Fonda has endorsed the International Women's Strike. So it really is a coming together across sectors, but in a lot of ways we see a lot more involvement and activity, what I would call the base, than we have seen before. And that's a good thing because you build from the Women's March to the International Women's Strike, and on May 1st, there's another strike that's being planned that will involve everybody who cares to participate, and we're hoping to see labor unions and others involved in that one. And of course, traditionally, in the last few years, May 1st has been the day that the immigrant community in particular have made their power and their presence felt on the street. So it's a continuum. And in the age of Trump, with a man with white supremacist contacts in the White House, Trump's background of racism in housing in New York City and more, a lot of people are realizing this is what time it is. You know, Kim, I was shocked to find out this morning that in Arkansas, a piece of legislation has been introduced to ban the book of Howard Zinn, the great historian Howard Zinn, who wrote the People's History of the United States. They want to ban his book in schools, in public schools. So there's a lot at stake here. Women are in the leadership of this, and I don't think that that's an accident, because women have always been central in every social movement, but a lot of times very much in the background, and have also had to face a lot of sexism, frankly speaking, in those movements as well. So it's a really exciting time. It's an empowering time. A lot of people involved are really, truly exhausted, but it's a very good exhaustion, Kim, because we just have to keep on going. There's a lot at stake.
Absolutely, and we appreciate all the efforts that you and your cohorts have expanded in order to make this march and these protests and these Day of Solidarities for women across the country and across the world happen. So, Margaret, we want to thank you for that, and thank you for joining us and talking to us about it today.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you.
We've been speaking with Margaret Prescod. She is the nationally syndicated radio host of the Sojourner Truth. You can listen to her on the Pacifica networks across the country. She's also one of the organizers of International Women's Day, which is happening Wednesday, March the 8th. If you're not able to actually attend a protest or a rally, wear red in solidarity. Margaret, thanks again. And thank you for watching the Real News Network.